After school, while other students get picked up by their parents, this little girl has to walk home alone under the rain. Suddenly, a familiar car stops for her, so she happily enters it. Once she gets home and opens the door, her mother suddenly stops cutting cucumbers and becomes extremely scared to even move. Upon seeing this, the little girl becomes sad and enters the room. Apparently, the little girl is already dead, but her ghost often visits the mother after school hours. As the news reports the death of the little girl who was found in a red suitcase, a store owner immediately remembers that 10 days ago a customer had come to buy a red suitcase that was similar to the one on the news. The customer had paid with a check and had signed his name on it. But after the customer had left, the store owner realized that the name on the check was similar to the name of a pizza delivery boy. And coincidentally, that delivery boy had also delivered pizza to the weird man's apartment. While receiving payment, he heard the sound of something falling, but he dismissed it as nothing. After the boy leaves, the weird man goes to his basement to check up on the little girl that he had kidnapped. Now in the present, after watching the news about the red suitcase, the store owner picks up his phone to report his suspicion to the police, but his wife stops and warns him against reporting the case since it will be a hassle to deal with the police. At the same time, the delivery boy also reads about the weird man case and realizes that the death of the little girl coincides with the day that he had delivered pizza to the weird man. The next day, the dead girl's mother hides under the table, waiting for the ghost of her daughter to appear. But as the door opens, her husband walks in from work. She immediately rushes to tell him about the ghost of their daughter who keeps returning home. She's scared and regrets not picking up her daughter from school that day. But instead of sympathizing with her, the husband looks tired of her usual tales. So he drives her to their daughter's room and shows the empty room. The woman is still scared, so he begins to criticize her for being scared of their dead daughter's ghost. According to him, he will be happy if the ghost of his daughter ever visits him. At the same apartment, the security guard searches through the wastes and finds a smelly plastic bag. He immediately suspects that the waste is from the weird man, so he knocks at the man's door and asks for special payments before disposing of the smelly item. But the weird man refuses to pay, so the guard begins to open up the waste in front of the man's door. As he opens the plastic bag, he finds a bloodied uniform with the name tag of the little girl who was reported dead. Before he can make out what's happening, the weird man suddenly rushes out and hits him with a huge wood, causing him to bleed and die. At the same time, the dead girl's mother comes home to the apartment and is scared to see a huge pool of blood on the staircase. But she becomes relieved when she sees the weird man cleaning up the blood. She doesn't suspect anything, but continues walking to her room, which is next to the weird man's room. It turns out that they're neighbors. Unknown to the woman, it was the weird man who had picked up her dead daughter from school on the day she died. The little girl had trusted him and got into his car, since they were neighbors, but he kidnapped and locked her up in his room. As for the pizza delivery boy, he hasn't given up on finding the killer of the little girl. As he browses different news reports on the case, he notices a blurred-out picture of someone who resembles the weird man. He tries to take a close look, but a call for pizza delivery comes in, so he prepares to make the delivery. Coincidentally, it was the weird man who placed the order. As he delivers the pizza, he notices a face cap in the man's room and realizes that it is similar to the one worn by the person in the blurred-out picture. He eventually leaves after making the delivery, so the weird man eats the pizza and proceeds to decapitate the body of the security guard that he had killed. The next day, he goes to the same store to buy another huge suitcase, but the store owner immediately recognizes him and begins to act scared around him. Upon seeing this, the weird man begins to suspect that the store owner knows about his secrets. Since the security guard has gone missing, the caretaker of the apartment employs a new security guard and instructs him to visit one of the tenants who has a high water bill. So that night, the new guard calls the tenant and questions him about his high water usage. Apparently, the tenant is the weird man who uses too much water to clean off blood after murdering someone. The weird man ignores the question and drops the phone to answer a doorbell, so the security guard continues to call. The constant call causes the phone to vibrate and fall into a suitcase, making it suitable to automatically lock. Meanwhile, in that same apartment, there's a little girl with an uncanny resemblance to the dead girl. This girl is named Su Yu. She is often carefree and would confidently touch the tattoo of one of the tenants, whom everyone regards as a thug. Seeing her carefree attitude, the thug gives her his loan business card and tells her to give him a phone call anytime she needs a loan. While going to school, she finds an eyeglass on the floor and picks it up. Unknown to her, It belongs to the murdered security guard. Downstairs, the dead girl's mother sees her and falls to the ground in shock because she thought that Su Yu is the ghost of her dead daughter. Seeing this, Su Yu runs up to help the woman up. As she assists the woman to the apartment, the weird man comes across them and quickly runs into his room. He's confused and also thinks that Su Yu is the girl that he had murdered. Meanwhile, the woman chats for some time with Su Yu and sends her away. But then she notices that her suspicious neighbor is also watching the little girl. Later in the day, Su Yu goes downstairs and hands over the lost eyeglass to the new security guard. She tells him that she had found it in front of the weird man's apartment, so the guard grows suspicious since the eyeglass belonged to the former guard. So that day, he goes to inspect the weird man's apartment under the disguise of checking for a water leakage. After making sure that there's no leakage, he asks to inspect the bathroom in the weirdo's basement. While walking into the basement, he notices a huge black suitcase and several gallons of bleach, but he pretends that he didn't see them. The weirdo notices his strange behavior and slowly pulls out a knife from his back, but the guard notices his actions and immediately holds on to his work tool. Upon seeing this, the weirdo retracts his steps and hides back the knife. With shaky hands, the guard continues to pretend to work on the drainage. Suddenly, he notices some bloody hairs on the floor and some splash of blood on the wall. He pretends not to see it and leaves after working on the drainage. While outside, he remembers that the little girl had found the eyeglass in front of the weirdo's apartment, so this confirms his suspicion. Now that his secret has been discovered, the weirdo becomes paranoid and worries that he will be reported to the police. As he stands outside thinking about this, the thug, who lives in the same apartment, drives over and begins to beat him up for parking his car in the wrong place. As soon as the thug leaves, the weirdo promises to get revenge on him, so he goes to his workplace and applies for an immediate transfer. His boss agrees to the request and stamps the document for his transfer. However, he has to provide his phone number in order to authenticate the transfer. The weirdo suddenly realizes that his phone is missing, so he rushes home to look for it. He suspects that the phone is inside the huge locked suitcase, so he tries to open it, but the suitcase requires some PIN combinations to open. Frustrated, he visits the store owner and asks for the passcode to the suitcase, but the man doesn't know the code, so the weirdo borrows the man's phone to dial the thug's phone number. Then he returns the phone to the man and leaves. While outside, he carefully studies the store's closing hours before leaving. The thug returns the phone call, so the phone owner picks up the call and tries to explain that he wasn't the one who dialed the number. Before he can explain, the thug cuts off the call. That night, as the dead girl's mother prepares dinner, the door opens and she immediately suspects her daughter's ghost has come again. But instead of getting scared as usual, she turns to look at her ghost daughter and invites the girl to dinner. They both become tearful, so she uses a towel to clean up the ghost and also apologizes for not picking her up from school on the day she was kidnapped and killed. While they break down in tears, unknown to them, the weirdo is plotting his moves to kill Su Yu. He sees her standing on a bus station and waits for the perfect time to kill the girl. But luckily, the little girl's mother arrives in time to escort the girl home. Seeing that his plan has failed, he drives his car to the store owner's shop and kidnaps the man. Then he orders pizza from the delivery boy. After making the delivery, the pizza boy notices a blood stain on his hand and realizes that it's from the money he received from the weirdo. Upon this realization, he sneaks into the apartment and peeps into the weirdo's house. He's almost caught by the weirdo, but the security guard comes in time to act as a distraction. Once he's saved, he shows the bloodied money to the guard, but the guard dismisses it as nothing and sends the pizza boy away. Apparently, the reason the guard is reluctant to report the weirdo to the police is because he himself had killed someone 14 years ago. However, he had escaped without being caught, so he's waiting for 15 years to pass in order for his statute of limitation to expire. Once it expires, he won't be charged for the murder case. If he reports the weird man, the police may also investigate him for the murder that took place 14 years ago. That same night, the weird man lures out the thug to the park and tries to beat him up with a rod, but the thug overpowers him and uses the rod to beat him instead. After beating up the weird man, the thug spits on him and drops the rod before leaving. Unknown to him, the weird man had planned this in order to get the thug's fingerprint and saliva. He uses a handkerchief to clean off the saliva and puts it in a suitcase containing the body of one of his victims. The next morning, as Su Yu leaves for school, the dead girl's mother notices the weird man staring weirdly at her. At the same time, the security guard stops Su Yu and advises her to be careful while returning from school. but she reassures him that her mother often picks her up from school. As Su-yu goes to school, the weird man continues to stalk her. Later in the day, the police arrest the thug and accuse him of all the murders going on, but his uncle comes in time to testify as an alibi. Once the thug sees all the evidence against him, he immediately realizes that it was all a setup by the weird man. Meanwhile, the store owner who is held captive struggles to free himself from the weirdo's basement. With his tongue, he inputs the passcode to the suitcase and opens it. He finds a phone inside and immediately dials a number for help. Fortunately, the number he dials belongs to the pizza delivery boy. Once the boy hears the man's cry for help, he immediately looks for a way to help. That same night, it begins to rain, so Su-yu's mother is unable to pick up her daughter from school since she's stuck up in a meeting. Seeing the rain, the dead girl's mother gets reminded of the day that her daughter died, so she picks up an umbrella and strolls to the school. Fortunately, she comes across Su-yu, and the two decide to walk home together. Unknown to them, the weird man is watching them from afar. He is angry that his plans have been ruined again. That night, due to the rainfall, the entire city experiences a power blackout. So the thug who was imprisoned uses this opportunity to escape from the police station. As Su-yu and the woman walk home together, the woman turns back and notices that the weird man is stalking them. At this moment, she begins to suspect that the man might be responsible for the death of her own daughter. Upon this realization, she instructs Su-yu to stick close to her until they get home. As the man continues to stalk them, they begin to run, and in the process, Su-yu hurts herself. Seeing their dire situation, the woman takes hold of Su-yu and walks to the middle of the road, making all the cars to halt their brake. Once the weirdo sees this, he quickly hurries home and prepares to run away from the town. But as soon as he enters his basement, he realizes that the store owner has managed to free himself from the ropes. They immediately get into a fight, and in the process, he stabs the store owner. At the same time, the delivery boy arrives at the apartment and sees the security guard who is waiting for Su-yu's arrival from school. Meanwhile, the weirdo begins to pour fuel on the floor of the basement in order to erase evidence of all of his crimes. As he pours the fuel, his doorbell suddenly rings. The person outside is the delivery boy who has come to save the store owner. The weirdo invites the boy inside the house, but as he's about to kill the boy, the security guard arrives in time to act as a distraction. Seeing this, the weirdo becomes extremely angry, so he pulls out a knife to kill both the guard and the boy. Fortunately, the thug arrives at the apartment after his escape from the station. He's here to get revenge on the weirdo for setting him up. As he approaches the weirdo to fight, the electricity gets restored, so they're able to notice the store owner bleeding in a corner. As everyone rushes to check up on the store owner, the thug begins to hit the weirdo. Meanwhile, the guard is still worried about Su-yu, since she is yet to return from school. He quickly pulls the weirdo by the neck and questions him about the little girl. Upon seeing the seriousness on the guard's face, the weirdo then lies that he had already killed the little girl. The guard is devastated at this news, so he suddenly picks up a heavy item and in the presence of everyone, he hits the weirdo in the head, causing him to bleed to death. After a while, the ambulance arrives to take away the dead body of the weirdo. The little girl also arrives and reunites with her mother. The security guard watches this afar and immediately leaves once the police arrive at the scene. 1 month after the incident, everyone returns to their daily lifestyle. The dead girl's mother finally achieves peace after the death of her daughter. Meanwhile, the store owner becomes suspicious of everyone who comes to buy a suitcase from his store. One day while eating with his wife, he recounts that the weirdo used to be terrified of something. It turns out that after murdering the little girl, the weirdo also sees her ghost walking into the house.